Right. Good evening, everyone. We're going to go ahead and get started just for the sake of everybody's time. I appreciate everybody who has already joined us, and those who are still joining, thank you for being here. I'm sure some people will still continue to jump on, and that's perfectly fine. They will join us wherever we are at. But I want to welcome everybody to our Spring Performance Clinic. Today we are focusing on performance anxiety prevention. We have the honor to have Cali Werner here today with us. You're going to learn a little bit more about who she is and what her background is in just a moment. But thank you all for being here today.
Thank you all.
Today you are going to be hearing from two different speakers. First, you're going to be hearing from Julie Berry, who is a prevention specialist with the ILHPP, or the Illinois Human Performance Project team. She will be moderating the conversation today between herself and Cali Werner. Cali Werner is a LCSW, and she is also here today from her LLC, Athlete Rising. So without further ado, I am going to pass the conversation right over to Cali and Julie. So Julie, go ahead and take it away.
Thanks, Abby. Cali, welcome to our webinar here for the hour. Really great to have you.
Wonderful. Excited to be here. Thanks for having me.
So before we start, I'm just going to give a little more of a list of you, say a couple words, and then we'll just dive right in. So welcome, everybody. Cali is an LCSW, currently a Ph.D. student, was a 2020 U.S. Olympic trial marathon runner, and I think she might be going for it again.
That's the plan. One more time.
That's the plan. She's the founder of Athlete Rising LLC and very versed in topics like OCD, ritualistic repetitive behaviors, confidence, and performance anxiety. So Cali, before I shoot some questions your way, I just want to, we've talked about that on the call. There are parents, coaches, social workers, teachers, counselors, just a whole gamut of people. So everyone listening in today, as we talk, and maybe if Cali gives a reference to like an athlete, anytime the word performance or anything comes in, please just filter through the lens of exactly why you're here tonight so that this conversation can be as beneficial to you as possible. Performance is performance. And all right, let's dive in. You ready?
Ready. Sounds good.
Okay, great. So why don't we just start? Why don't you share a little bit about, your personal story, why this topic and area is important to you?
Yeah, so I started experiencing what I didn't know at the time, OCD symptoms, when I was 4 years old. So OCD stands for obsessive compulsive disorder. And I kind of had those symptoms on and off throughout life. And when I was in college, competing pretty competitively, it got to a point where it was very difficult to hide at that point. I'd been pretty good at hiding it my whole life, and was worried that I had no idea what OCD was. And so I was worried that if other people found out, that they would think I was going crazy or something was wrong with me, or I'd get kicked off the team. That's a pretty common athlete mental health stigma type fear. And so I did a lot of things like repetitive counting, repeating certain behaviors over and over, a lot of superstitious behaviors, and also engaged in some other OCD subtypes, such as scrupulosity, which is that religious-based fear where someone will pray excessively in order to prevent, all of this was to prevent something bad from happening. And oftentimes it was tied to my racing. So if I don't engage in this behavior, I'm going to race poorly. Or if I don't engage in this behavior, I'm going to lose. And then the thoughts became more surreal and distressing when I was in that college place, to a point where I was afraid to go into restrooms by myself, was afraid to go to a restroom on campus. And as a distance runner, drinking lots of water throughout the day, that wasn't very ideal. So long story short, I finally got the appropriate evidence-based care, received a diagnosis, learned that I was not alone in what I was experiencing, but that just OCD isn't really talked about in the sense of scrupulosity or harm OCD or sexual intrusive thoughts, all subtypes of OCD, more so just talked about if you engage in excessive hand washing or keeping things tidy, but that wasn't the category that I fit into. And so I just had no idea. So got the appropriate evidence-based care, exposure with response prevention, and it was life-changing. And so I decided I wanted to change my career trajectory from being, I wanted to be a news reporter at the time, to a licensed clinician. And that's why we have Athlete Rising today.
Thanks for sharing that. I love how you're choosing to help others based on your own experience and what you found through someone helping you.
Thank you. Yeah.
So how can you tell if someone is experiencing anxious tendencies versus like a diagnosis they should be receiving mental health treatment for?
A great question. Yeah. I would say a lot of individuals experience anxiety tendencies, right? So if going back to OCD, there's a Y-box symptom checklist that goes through all of the different OCD symptoms. And I guarantee that everyone, whether they have that diagnosis or not, would be able to check off one or two things. And similar for anxiety. We've all experienced anxiety, but that doesn't mean that we all have a diagnosis of generalized anxiety disorder. What we're really looking for is that this behavior is impacting the day-to-day living, right? So is with OCD specifically, is it taking more than an hour out of your daily routine on average? And if you feel that every once in a while I get a little bit anxious, or when life gets stressful, I like to make checklists, and that's not an all the time thing, then maybe you're managing it pretty well. But if it is impacting your ability to do things in a way that you used to be able to do them, that's always a clear sign. Or if you feel like you're not really in the driver's seat with decisions anymore, with making decisions, but your anxiety is, that's also a pretty good indicator that some extra support might be beneficial.
I was just thinking, for those on the call thinking about their student or their athlete, what if that behavior shift is more internal and not necessarily noticeable to a coach? Like how does that happen? Because I think a lot of times adolescents keep things inside. So maybe they're struggling, but they're doing their best to appear as though they're not.
Right, for sure. Yeah, I would find that usually there would be a mood shift, right? So they would feel a little bit less excited. When mine became debilitating, I was a very social person, but I was engaging in what you were talking about, rumination, which is more of a mental compulsion, right? Trying to figure out something with certainty. Most anxiety disorders have that common denominator of not feeling like one can tolerate uncertainty with whatever the anxiety is latched onto. And so that rumination might be taking place. They just seem a little bit off from their normal their normal persona. But it's also okay for coaches to ask if something's going on. I think a lot of us have this fear of, well, I don't want to step on anyone's toes. But I think that we know a lot of the research says that athletes are afraid of what their coaches would think, or afraid of what their teammates would think. So if we're creating that space for them to be able to speak freely and know that it's going to be okay, they'll feel less alone and more inclined to seek out that support.
That's great. Great. Is superstition in sport related to anxiety?
Yeah, it can be. So we know that with some superstitious behaviors, athletes feel that they get more of a sense of control. But again, when we go to that diagnostic criteria for OCD, specifically magical thinking is the form of OCD that's where superstitious behaviors become debilitating. So for example, if I struggle with magical thinking, I might fear if I wear the color yellow because I had a bad memory in yellow, or because I just don't like the color yellow, I'm going to trip in a big game that's really important to me. That would be an example of magical thinking, right? Yellow doesn't really correlate to the game, but in the individual's head, it feels really real. When someone engages in a superstitious behavior, like a baseball player that maybe has to go up to bat and taps both sides of the bat with his cleats, if that's all that he ever does, that superstitious behavior, maybe we could even argue helping him, right? Not getting in the way. But if this athlete is predisposed to anxiety, if they have that genetic predisposition for it, if you will, that tapping of the cleats might turn into, okay, first I was just tapping my cleats twice. Now I'm tapping them 4 times. And now I'm having to high five the same teammate before the game. And now I'm having to remember that I wore this cologne before I started. And it just goes on to the point where it feels like it's almost out of their control. And so that's where we see the superstitious behavior being more of an obsessive compulsive behavior, is when it's growing or expanding into other realms of life instead of just that one thing.
That's great. That's great. Clarification of those 2 things. Okay, some might be thinking, all right, Kelly, but don't like you have to have some anxiety to compete well. Isn't that part of performance at large?
Yeah, there's a famous athlete that says something when he bikes about I always tell myself when I feel the nerves that it's excitement. And that's one of my favorite analogies, just because, yeah, we do have pre-race nerves, right? Pre-race jitters, and that releases the adrenaline that we need to be able to perform. But I do think there's a difference between that healthy level of anxiety and that unhealthy level of anxiety. And so one more sports psych coping mechanism would be able to say, I feel like my body's getting prepared. It's getting those jittery feelings, and that just means that it's excited to do its thing, versus, oh no, I'm having these feelings. And if someone, again, is struggling with a specific anxiety disorder, oftentimes that level of stress tends to fall over into the obsessive compulsive behaviors. So or whatever anxiety disorder they're experiencing, panic attacks. But to give a more personal example, one of the OCD subtypes that I experienced was harm OCD. And I feared that if I did something, like if I had an intrusive thought of hitting somebody, that I would actually do it. And so I would need to stay away from that person. And all of those harm thoughts around the time of a race would ramp up. And we see that these thoughts tend to increase during times of stress. So it would make sense, right? It's not necessarily correlated to the competition, but my stress level is up here because I'm not tolerating my stress well. And so all these compulsions are coming with it.
My mind's churning.
I think that's probably a good thing.
Yeah. Wow. Okay. And okay, I think you explained how you know when it's unhealthy and when it's a healthy anxiety. So here's a question we got. Should I consider stepping back from my sports or performance if it's causing me too much anxiety?
I love this question, and I get it often from parents of adolescents that are playing sports. And I would say with anxiety, we know if someone doesn't have the coping skills, oftentimes it does feel like, well, if I just remove that thing that's causing me all the stress, then everything will be okay and I'll get better. But in reality, what happens is the next time stress comes up, the anxiety just chooses to latch onto something else, right? We know with a lot of anxiety related disorders that, or with OCD specifically, it tends to latch on to what we care about the most. And so if an athlete loves their sport and it's causing them joy, but then the anxiety takes over and then they're starting to dread their sport, the more important thing to do is give them the appropriate coping skills to work through that, because the next time they get competitive at something or get good at something and start to fall in love with it, that anxiety will probably creep back up again.
Yes, a follow-up question, because something just sparked for me. Like you said, anxiety sometimes latches onto the things we care about the most.
Mm-hmm.
I have heard this. I've even thought this about athletes, and I'm wondering if you might be able to give a different perspective. Sometimes I've heard coaches say, "You're not trying hard enough. You just don't care, right? You've lost and we're looking to assign what's happening in a situation." But now I'm like, but what if that individual is having performance anxiety? What is a bigger perspective to think about if a mood shifts, or someone, maybe the thing they actually love the most can present like it doesn't seem like they love it.
Yeah, I think that's where we still see way too much stigma, right? Individuals that suffer with anxiety often get told, well, just stop. just stop doing that. Like, turn it off, quit worrying about that. Right. And if that were the case, we wouldn't need any therapist, any anxiety therapist, at least. It doesn't work that way. And so we're really having to rewire the brain in a sense, create new neural pathways, so that the individual can learn to tolerate that stress. And so I think it's all about a matter of educating coaches, to kind of think through that, but also understand that each athlete is unique and different. And right. So one athlete that is training for a marathon might need to be told every day, hey, don't forget to do your run. You've got to do your run. But another athlete might be overly perfectionistic, right? And that's probably the exact opposite of what they need to be told. They might need to be told, hey, it's a party out there. Make sure you go have fun running, and remember to smile when you're out there. And both athletes might be equally good, but then you put a coach with characteristics that are driven really hard and strict with an already perfectionistic athlete, they're probably going to blow up. They're probably going to reach that sense of burnout or want to withdraw, because they feel like they've lost control, or they've already had so much pressure on themselves. And so that's just piling on more pressure.
Yeah, so I'm hearing, as a coach or any type of influencer of a student or even just in life, is like, stay curious. There's individuality in each performer. So one, like, learn them, get to know them, stay growth in your mindset versus fixed, because that really is what will fight the stigma.
Yes, absolutely. You said it perfectly.
Cool. Okay, Callie, what are some ways or suggestions you might give to help get in the right mindset before a performance?
I would say, one, remember why you started this, right? So if an individual struggles with, usually this is helpful for people with perfectionistic tendencies, or those that are putting too much pressure on themselves, right? There was a part of this individual that at some point played the sport because they loved it. And if the perfectionism is there, then the standards are probably a little bit too high. And so they need to bring the fun back into it. So remember why you started this would be a huge aspect. And then the other would be, the outcome is not what we should focus on as much as the process, right? If we're focusing so much on the outcome, there's so many aspects of that we can't control, versus when we're focusing on the process, we are feeling a little like we feel like we have a little bit more control, right? Because that's what we've trained for. And then finally, there's a negative zone, a positive zone, and a drive zone for athletics. And so when someone's in the negative zone, they're engaging in a lot of negative thinking, probably just going to cause more anxiety. The positive zone is reframing a lot of those thoughts and changing the negative thoughts to positive thoughts, doing their best to believe in themselves. And then the drive zone is where an athlete does all the amazing things, right? They're just able to turn their brain off and go because their body was trained to do what it needs to do. And so I would also say, encourage athletes to remember to get to that drive zone, right? Like, remember that your body has trained for this competition. And so you can get to that starting line, that competition, whatever they're competing in, and just let it do its thing. The more trust that an athlete has in their abilities, the more confidence, the less anxiety that they'll feel.
Are you a coach? You'd be a
No,
great
I'm not.
You'd be a great coach.
I appreciate that. I do listen to a lot of coaches though.
Yeah. What suggestions would you give to someone that does get overly anxious before a competition? Would those be the same, or would you offer some different ideas?
I may add a few different things. First, I would try to understand how that anxiety is coming out for them, right? Like how it's showing up, and then discuss how certain behaviors may be exacerbating symptoms more. For example, one thing that I used to do was visualize every step of the race. But I was having so many intrusive thoughts at the time that visualizing for me was not helpful. But there's a lot of research that shows visualizing is really helpful. And now that I'm in a more healthy mindset, I can do something like that. But I think that's where we see things just start to get a little bit more personalized along the way. So those other three were more of the general top three.
Yeah, I'm kind of hearing a theme a little bit about the individuality, understanding what works for one may not work for the other, but it's like keep pressing in to find it.
Yes, exactly.
Okay, here's a question. My son overcame an injury. He's a track runner and has mentioned performance anxiety as a result. Any tips or suggestions?
Yeah, this is not an uncommon fear, like the fear of re-injury. And sometimes an athlete will want to hold back because they don't want that injury to happen again. When someone struggles with this, they might be engaging in like not putting as much weight on their foot, or avoiding, if it's football, like avoiding getting hit, or running. They might not want to run to reproduce that pain. And one thing I like to point out is when we're anxious and we are focused on that specific body part, or whatever it is that was injured, to like an unhealthy degree, we're going to feel it, right? We're going to feel that pain regardless, because we're so focused on it. Our brains are really powerful, so we can make these somatic thoughts become physical. The day before a race for a track runner, I'm sure you've heard this before, but that's when an athlete feels the most aches and pains, right? Because their body's already so amped. And so getting them to relieve some of that anxiety actually is going to help them feel things a little bit more truly, I guess, would be the answer. But just to also start small. So when we do exposure with response prevention, the type of therapy for a lot of anxiety related disorders, we're easing into the exposure. So if an athlete has avoided running for injury, but the doctor cleared them, we might start small by, if they used to run 8 to 10 miles a day because they were a distance runner, we might just say, hey, run 2 minutes, right? Walk 1 minute and then run 2 minutes, and see how that feels, right? If I told them go run 8 miles today and they have been experiencing debilitating anxiety for a really long time, they're never going to come back to another therapy session. So we want to start small, let that anxiety start to come down, let that athlete start to understand, oh, that really was my fight or flight response activating incorrectly. And then they can build up to that freedom again.
Great. I bet this is a very common one across those listening. How do you talk to a student who believes that if they don't succeed one time in something, that they fail, that they're going to fail those around them, or I'm going to put another spin on it, that they're going to always fail at that thing? So it's a two-part question.
I would tell that individual to recognize some of those distorted thinking patterns, right? If they feel that it's about failure, put it in perspective, in a different perspective. So for example, oh, well, that's interesting. You're giving yourself this all or nothing type of mentality. But let's say you had a friend that maybe told you when you were 5 that they liked the shirt you were wearing. And when you were 25, they said, hey, remember that one time when you were 5 and I said, I like that shirt? I really didn't. Well, does that mean that you're going to assume that they've lied to you their entire life? Or does that mean that you were like, yeah, that was kind of a funny moment, right? So that's just an example of how we didn't take that to an extreme for somebody else. So should we be actually doing that for ourselves? It's so inaccurate to call that friend a chronic liar when they said that one lie. And so it's so inaccurate to tell yourself that because you failed that one time, you're going to fail for the rest of your life. And then also, I'll add one more piece to that, and that in order to be great and do great things, we have to fail along the way, right? I love to send that reminder out that, and I know I keep using track references. I've probably got to get better at using some other sport references, but Usain Bolt, fastest guy arguably ever. And he doesn't win every race. He wins some races and loses some races, but that is because he's a healthy athlete. And healthy athletes go into peak performances, but then they go down, right? We can't be at our peak performance all the time. That would actually really lead to some negative consequences. And so just viewing that training cycle more as a cycle where really great things happen, but the failures are part of the process too.
Yeah, that's great. This question is, how do you help parents, I would say coaches, teachers, counselors, remove the stigma of anxiety so that they can help support students getting the mental health that they actually need?
Yeah, one way I do it, especially if a coach or someone is sharing information with me, is giving them the appropriate resources to do some of the research on their own. I mean, if I have the opportunity to do a talk like this or send a talk like this over a link, of course, that's always beneficial. But if they're telling me something specific, also normalizing it a little bit and saying, oh yeah, this is actually, something that a lot of athletes struggle with, but that we also know would really be beneficial for them if they got some appropriate care, right? And sometimes people shy away from therapy, and they'll say, oh, therapy, I don't need that. I'm fine. I'm doing fine. And so my argument is that with cognitive behavioral therapy, there's a lot of negative thinking that we're restructuring along the way. So if anything, if that athlete is hesitant to get therapy, or if the coach is hesitant after speaking to them about, yeah, I think maybe this athlete would benefit from some therapy. Well, if the athlete engages in any negative thinking, like any human being does at any point, then at least they're going to get some benefit from more positive thinking. And could that possibly enhance their performance, right? So mental health, of course, would be the first focus. But if we can get buy-in from the athlete and the coach of, well, could we engage in more positive thinking that could help performance with some coping skills from CBT, then maybe that would create it.
Great. How do you break down the mental barrier preventing running success?
The mental barrier preventing running success. So if well, one thing I'll say is I think a lot of individuals feel, well, you run races all the time, so you must not get nervous anymore. And most athletes know that the nervousness never goes away. We just know how to cope with it better, right? And use it to an advantage instead of a disadvantage. So something that I do now is I live what I call an exposure with response prevention lifestyle, or ERP lifestyle, where one thing that I used to do when I was really struggling, I would do things in fours. I felt like 4 was a safe number, and I felt like 6 was a bad number. And so if I ran 3.9 miles, well, in my head, 3 was a multiple of 6, so I had to get to 4. Or if I ran 6.2 miles, I'd have to get to 7 because 6 is in there, all those types of things where, sure, yeah, maybe even argue that I was doing extra mileage. So at the time that maybe benefited my performance, but in reality, all those moments add up and just lead to burnout along the way. So even today, I will go for a run and I'll have that thought in the back of my head of, oh, if I just, round this number up, I'll be at a better number. But so every so often I will make myself stop my watch on one of those numbers that I don't like and sit with that discomfort, because it's just a reminder now who's in control, right? And that can also, after therapy, become a little bit empowering, right? That reminder of, wow, this anxiety doesn't control me in the way that it used to anymore. And then it gives you even more confidence. I don't know if that answered the question fully.
Hopefully it did, but I have a follow-up to it. When you say sometimes I will make myself run to a number and stop there, and then you said I will sit with the discomfort. Can you share more about that? What does that mean? How does someone do?
So with the anxiety cycle, the way that it works is we have, actually, is it possible for me to screen share the whiteboard, or would that mess everything up?
Abby, can she screen share the whiteboard?
You are welcome to try, Callie, and let me know if you don't have access, and I will try to get you access.
I think I do.
All right, go for it. Go for it.
Perfect. So we have the anxiety cycle here, and this side stands for anxiety, and this side stands for time. So if I were to start thinking to myself, oh my gosh, if I hit 6 miles, then I need to go to 7. I've already hit 6. I'm going to lose my next race. My anxiety is going to start to go up. And we know that the human body does not like feeling that anxious, right? It wants to feel better, and it wants to feel better fast. And so I'm just going to maybe tell myself, okay, you know what? I'm going to run to 7, and I run to 7. Great. I feel much better. The only problem with that is the next time I run and I get stuck around that number, I'm going to feel the need to just do that all over again, run to 7, get that instant relief. Well, when we're sitting with the discomfort and doing exposure with response prevention, we're eliminating that unhelpful behavior or compulsion, right? And we're saying, you know what, I'm going to go and I'm going to run and I'm going to stop at 6. And at first, that first time you do that, that anxiety goes up even a little higher because you're so used to doing that unhelpful behavior. But what we know about the human body is that the anxiety can't stay up for that long. And if I engage in the rest of my day, right, sitting with the discomfort means engaging with the day without unhealthy distraction, like scrolling on my phone or an unhealthy behavior. And if I was planning to go to work after going to work, trying to be as present as possible, that anxiety eventually does come down. And so we keep practicing that exposure. And then we see over time that that peak of anxiety is no longer triggering. And then we've got freedom from whatever it is that causes it. So long story short, sitting with the discomfort just is you being able to say, yeah, that thought's back there. I really do want to do that, but I'm not going to let it be all consuming. I'm just going to let it be back there, and I'm going to focus on my day. And eventually that thought starts to dwindle.
That visual is incredibly helpful in all kinds of fronts. Like I'm thinking of someone who, like this is even a good thing, but the dishes have to be done at night before I go to bed. And, like all these things, even sitting with discomfort in everyday type things in life, there's probably so many unhealthy behaviors we don't even realize are unhealthy behaviors. And
Yeah.
wow.
You explain a really important point, right? Those rigid behaviors, and we didn't really talk about that, but the rigidity can come up as well, where someone feels like, well, no, I just have to do it this way. And rigidity is just another way for anxiety to kind of show up, right? And so
Mhm.
when we ask ourselves who's in the driver's seat, I always like to say, okay, but could you go for a walk and enjoy that walk without putting the dishes away? And if the answer is no, okay, that's a clear indicator that anxiety is making that decision for you. And so that would be a healthy behavior to practice, because in the short term, it's hard, right? To do an exposure, to do the thing that we've been avoiding for so long. But in the long term, the freedom that you get from that, from not having that burden, if your kid is pulling you to go for a bike ride with them and you just need to put that down and actually enjoy the bike ride, that is so freeing, and anyone can work towards that with the practice.
Yeah, what a really awesome invitation. That's cool. Okay, another question. What routines do you, Callie, use to mentally prepare for events?
So I know with my history of struggling with some compulsions that it is more beneficial for me to stick to pre-performance routines instead of pre-performance rituals. And so a ritual might be me tying my shoe over and over until I get that just right feeling, right? There's this component of I'm trying to control a situation that I don't have control over, but a pre-race routine would be stretching, because I know stretching loosens me up for the race and helps me to feel ready and prepared. So me engaging in doing things like eating oatmeal with peanut butter and honey, because I know that sits well on my stomach, would be a good pre-performance routine. But I also know what it would look like for the OCD and anxiety to take that over, right? It would say maybe, well, oh no, you're at the hotel for this race and the only oatmeal they have is apple cinnamon, and you don't usually eat apple cinnamon, you usually have brown sugar. So also reminding myself to have some flexibility in there. So there's some exposure work in there as well. When I start to notice that rigidity and that anxiety coming up, of reminding myself, nope, I have freedom now. I can have the apple cinnamon oatmeal and I can be flexible with that, and I can go on about my race and enjoy it. So that's a lot of what the routine looks like for every aspect of getting ready. And I will say, I used to engage in probably 10 to 20 compulsions before a race, and every once in a while I'll catch myself doing one now, but it by no means has the control over me that it did, and I know the exposure work to do for it so it doesn't get to that place again. A big part of that is sometimes people get discouraged, right? They'll say, oh, well, I gave into that compulsion, or I did that behavior that was unhelpful again, so that must mean I've relapsed. And big reminder is there's a huge difference between a lapse and a relapse. We all have lapses, but we don't all have to have relapses.
Oh, okay. Big difference between lapse and relapse.
Yes.
Wrote that down in my brain.
Perfect.
We just have a couple more questions. So if you are churning on a question, please write that in the Q&A so we can ask Cali before our time ends. Here's one. This one is a little bit to be unpacked, I think, but how can you tell if someone is experiencing anxious tendencies or potentially should seek help for receiving an actual diagnosis or mental health treatment? How can you tell the difference?
Yeah, if someone's got some anxious tendencies, they might feel a little bit of extra nervousness, but overall can cope with it, and still feel, like me, I have some anxious tendencies here and there, but now I know, okay, I know what I'm supposed to do, and I can move past those. The tendencies don't control me, I control them. But if they feel, sometimes I'll see an athlete crying before a race, right? Or every time someone competes, they're throwing up before they go out. All of those are definitely more debilitating, which I would imagine also takes a lot of the joy away from the sport. And the earlier that an athlete engages in therapy, I think the more preventative that they're being once those symptoms get noticed. Oftentimes we feel, the individual has to be completely debilitated before they get therapy, when in reality, no. Even if they're just struggling a little bit, they get the coping skills ahead of time so that when that life stuff gets more stressful, right? If they're seeing, if a mom's seeing some anxious tendencies in their young soccer player, and that soccer player wants to go on to play in high school and they're 7 or 8 now, well, in high school, there's way more stress with competition, a lot more pressure. And so more likely than not, if those tendencies are already there, they're going to exacerbate with more of that stress if they don't have the right coping skills. But it's possible for them to get them early so that they can put them into place when that stress comes on.
Yeah, that's great. How does someone know when to seek support for like a sports psychologist versus a mental health clinician?
For sports psychology, I think we're really gearing everything towards performance. With maybe sharpening the edges, getting to that peak performance mentality, maybe just feeling like halfway through the season there isn't any anxiety, but just feeling like, I need that extra boost to kind of get me through. All of that is excellent resources for sports psychology, right? Having the right mindset to compete. If someone is experiencing more specific symptoms like panic attacks, or constant rumination in their head a lot, and especially if it's not just 5 minutes before a game, right? If they're experiencing this days leading up to the game or competition, or even outside of their sport, that's when a mental health clinician can be beneficial to really target those behaviors, if there's a specific diagnosis.
I'm going to tack a follow-up question to that. I'm imagining some parents or adults, and I've heard this before, just would have like some like general concern around if my athlete or my child has anxiety. I don't want them to just throw medicine at them, or there's a lot of concern, I'm sure, stigma around medicine. Also, I'm sure people have experiences where they've known people where medicine seemed to have not helped, or there's a lot there with medicine. And what might you say to individuals around their fears or concerns around medicine?
So I think you're right. All of those fears come up. And also the other fear comes up of, well, can you just let me have medicine and I don't need to do the therapy? So I'll try to speak to each of those. That first one that I just mentioned, we know with a lot of anxiety disorders that behavioral therapy alone can be enough for some individuals, right? The exposure with response prevention, cognitive behavioral therapy, but medication alone, not enough, right? We know with OCD, most of the research says that the combination of an SSRI, SNRI, certain types of medication with ERP shows the best benefits. Medication alone, not so much. And then the ERP alone can work really well for some people. So when someone is nervous about medication and they've never engaged in therapy before, then it is appropriate to try the behavioral therapy alone, right? When I see that somebody might benefit a little bit more from the medication is we measure anxiety on a scale of 1 to 10, and 10 is panic attack level, right? And so if I have someone coming in with contamination OCD and they say, well, it would cause me a level 10 to open a door because they're avoiding doorknobs. And so I say, okay, well, how much anxiety would it cause you to just picture yourself opening the door or to hold your hand over the door, but not actually touch it? If they keep saying a 10 and a 10 and a 10, we're not really able to engage in the therapy yet, right? And so that medication can lower some of that anxiety so that they can engage in the behavioral therapy component. So that's where we see that it might be beneficial. And I also tell athletes we don't have to say that it's got to be a forever thing either, right? My hard push for most individuals is don't have a harsh no, but don't have a harsh yes, right? Just try to be in that middle, kind of like approaching it with curiosity. See a good clinician that you know and trust that can kind of help advocate for the right path for you and make you feel like you're in good hands. But knowing too that there's outlets each way, right? If you try one medication and it doesn't work, everybody's genetics are completely different. And so one person might not respond in a certain way and another person will respond really well. And just because that first medication maybe wasn't for you doesn't mean by any means that you're at a dead end. And then finally, maybe an individual takes the medication and they engage in the behavioral therapy and they're doing really well. And they decide they want to see how they're doing without the medication because they've got that learned component down. There's so many opportunities. And of course, by no means am I a psychiatrist, but those are first speak to a psychiatrist, but those are some of the main takeaways that I have just from my work in the field.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, again, I think that comes back to individuality, be a learner, right? Figure out what works for one person may not work for another. And so a lot of that depends is what I feel like I'm hearing you say.
Yeah, and one more thing I thought of is we can't live in the 1%. And what I mean by that is we can read a side effect of something and see that maybe happened to 1, 2 people, however many people, right? But living in the 1% would be like ruling out every medication because, well, there's a side effect for that one. There's a side effect for that one. And just recognize nobody lives in the 1% zone for every aspect of life, right? We tolerate uncertainty very well with something. So for example, if I'm on my way to the grocery store, thinking about buying eggs and milk, I'm not thinking about that 1% chance of getting in a car accident. And so that's a perfect example of me handling uncertainty healthily. So just a reminder, if the anxiety is making you go to that worst case scenario in another aspect, try to get back to that middle healthy uncertainty zone.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's good. One of the reasons we asked you to talk about this is it's just like as we go into schools and all over, this is like performance anxiety is like the number one worksheet that gets taken from our tables, and we're sought out a lot of information about that. And I'm just kind of curious, do you think performance anxiety has just kind of steadily been a thing, or do you have thoughts on why it seems like it's on the rise? I'm just curious.
I do have thoughts. I don't have specific research, so this is just kind of my hypothesis here.
That's not evidence-based. Gotcha.
Perfect. Yes. I definitely think that pressures are increasing for athletes at younger ages, right? So we're beginning to see athletes getting recruited for college younger and younger, right? And so there's that pressure. Then there's pressure to do a lot of other things, pressure to not really have free time, even with filling time by getting on your phone and scrolling or talking to a friend. All of those things, I think, make the pressure much more intense and more difficult to tolerate. I also know after COVID, there was a big increase in anxiety just kind of across the board, and maybe caused an onset of anxiety for some individuals, and which could have been slowly exacerbating to a point where maybe now they're starting to seek care. Oh, I think I lost you. There you go.
I was
Okay,
muted.
perfect.
So that kind of concludes our questions, but before we end, like, just any other thoughts on anxiety, performance anxiety that you want to share before Abby comes and closes us out?
Yeah, I would just like to finish with don't let anxiety ruin the love of a sport or whatever it is that you're performing in. It shouldn't have to. And so if it is at that place, there's appropriate resources and tools to help utilize those and get that love back.
Great. Thank you, Cali. You're awesome. And we're so thankful here at the Human Performance Project that you would come and share your experience and knowledge with us. And it's been a real treat.
Thank you. It's an honor, of course.
All right, what a fantastic conversation. Thank you both, Julie and Cali, for your time this evening. Thank you, Cali, for your just willingness to come join us as well as talk on this topic. As Julie mentioned, performance anxiety is something that is continuously being brought up and brought to our attention. And we know it's something that is increased for adolescents, but also for adults as well. So this is just such an important conversation. And I know everybody listening and everyone who will watch the recording will greatly benefit from all of the information that you shared this evening. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Abby.
I do want to take some time just to remind everybody where they can find any further resources from the Illinois Human Performance Project. So you can visit our website at ilhpp.org. All of our resources are free and downloadable on our website, so I encourage you to check it out. If you're ever looking for hard copies, we are more than willing to send you any materials that you would be looking for, so please feel free to reach out to us. And we also encourage you to follow us on all of our social media platforms. We are on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube. And then on the right side of the screen here, I just wanted to take a second to highlight our newest materials. These are our new and improved science module guides, if you will, that cover all of the 4 topics we talk about. So mood and mindset, nutrition, sleep, and chemical health. I encourage you to check them out. Again, you can check them out on the website. I also want to just take a moment and share our next event that we have coming up. So our biggest event of the year will be in August 2nd and 3rd. We are hosting our 2023 Summer Conference. This year's theme is Be Your Own Best Advocate. Day 1 will be at the Lamont Park District, and then we are going to the Forge Adventure Park to do some activity-based work with some of our speakers. We will be bringing in Bailey Cullen from Stronger Scars, our partner from NAMI Chicago, Frederica Malone, MNP Presentations, as well as Nate Scott, who owns Fuel Inspired. So we're very excited. We encourage you to invite any students in your life that you feel like could benefit from an event like this. Truly just an opportunity to network with students from across Illinois, as well as learn how to be their own best advocate. Finally, I just want to say thank you so much for being here this evening. Thank you for taking the time out of your day to join us. If you don't mind, we encourage you to take a moment to scan the QR code on the screen and take an eval for us, just giving us some feedback on tonight's event so we can help be better for any future events in the future. Otherwise, I hope you have a great rest of your evening, and thank you all so much for being here today. And thank you once again to Cali Werner. Have a great evening.